What is up, everybody? Welcome to another video. Today is a good day because I get to build a computer and that's always fun. So today I've gathered all the parts for a good friend of mine's computer build. It's going to be roughly a $900 Canadian build, so a little bit less US currency. And it's a gaming PC that's going to be used for upcoming games like Resident Evil 3, Cyberpunk 2077, even older games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and some workstation use as well. So I figured I'd make a build log and kind of show you how to put together a gaming PC. I'm not a professional videographer by any means, but I'll try my best to be as thorough as possible and show you as many tips as I can. But first, let's take a look at the parts we got. Alright, so first up we got the Ryzen 5 2600 CPU. It's a 6-core 12-thread processor, and with prices dropping, it's one of the best price to performance CPUs you can buy. So highly recommended. Next up we got the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. CPU does come with a CPU cooler, but I did want to overclock it at least a little bit, so this will definitely help. I think it costs around 30 bucks, so for that price you can't really go wrong, and it'll look a lot cooler too. So in terms of storage, we got the Western Digital Blue SN550. It's a M.2 NVMe storage drive, so this thing should be super fast. We're gonna be loading the operating system and some games on it, so really good stuff. Next up we got the RAM. This is the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro, 3200 megahertz, 16 gigabytes, dual channel. I really wanted to get the black one, but this one was on sale for 20 bucks less, so couldn't really argue with that, but I still think it'll look good. For the motherboard, we have the ASRock B450M AC. This is the cheapest motherboard I can find with built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and I usually find those ones work better than the PCI cards that you can buy, and ASRock makes pretty good stuff, so I think this will be a good board overall. Now for the star of the show, we got the AMD Radeon 5500 XT. Great budget card, and I got the 8GB version just to be a little more future-proof and more capable of running newer games at high resolution. I think this will be a great card overall, and I'm really excited to see how it performs. I like to grab this as well. Worst case scenario, it's a Deepcool fan splitter. It goes from 4 fan headers to 1, and it helps out a little bit with cable management, and sometimes I find the motherboards don't have enough fan headers, so this might come in handy. So for the tools, all you really need is a screwdriver, but I like to have around a magnetic tray just for the screws so they don't get lost, and then a box cutter to open up the boxes. Also some zip ties for cable management is recommended, and then I have a cable cutter here. Also some bananas for scale, also to keep me energized throughout the day. Now for the peripherals, these are not included in the cost and they will most likely be upgraded, but what we have right now is a Logitech MK235 wireless keyboard and mouse. Also some Logitech 2.1 speakers and a Dell monitor, which I believe is upstairs. I'll have to grab that. So this is the case we're going to be putting everything in. It's from Cooler Master. It's the MasterBox Lite 3.1. And it also comes with the power supply included. Sometimes you can score a better deal if you buy the case and power supply together, which in this case was a good deal. And normally this case comes with 3 different trim colors, but because they give you red LED fans included, I think they're only including the red trim. So that's something I'm going to confirm once I open up the case, but really good deal overall. Okay, so the first 3 components that you're going to want to have set aside are the motherboard, as well as the CPU cooler and the CPU itself. So once we got everything, we're going to go ahead and open up the motherboard. What we have for this motherboard is a SATA cable. These are used for hard drives, SSDs, and older optical drives. We got the Wi-Fi antennas for this board, as well as the input-output shield. This will be mounted onto the case, as I will show you later on. You also get a screw to mount the M.2 storage drive, which I will be using later. Try to grab it from parts that doesn't actually touch the board itself, like these heat sinks, or from below it you have this foam. And then just lay it on top here. Next up, you want to open up the CPU itself. So this is the processor. This is what we're going to be using. Now the cooler that's included is in here as well, but I'm going to leave it as is for now. So what you want to do is open up the box for the CPU. Alright, so this is the processor itself. So I'm going to put this aside for a quick second, and then what you want to do is push down on this tab here. So just push this tab here and then push it to the side and then up. So now that we have the slot opened up, we're going to open up the CPU. Just open it up carefully, and then what you want to do is grab it from the sides. So grab it from both sides. And as you'll see, there's a little gold triangle here. So what you want to do is just align it with the triangle on the motherboard itself. It's kind of hard to tell, but the triangle is right there on this side. So that's where you want to align the gold triangle on the CPU. So just grab the CPU from the edges again, and then we're going to align it with the triangle. So you don't really need to put any pressure, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wiggle it a little bit. There we go. So just slot it into place. And then once it's into place, you can just wiggle it to make sure. And then just go ahead and put this tab down. And then you're all set. Next up, we got this big boy. Now these can be a pain to install. They're all kind of vary a little bit differently. So the installation process is a little different for each cooler. But I'm gonna be showing you a general approach and how to do this one specifically. So let's go ahead and open up the box. For something like this, I really do recommend checking the manual. The concept is usually the same, but they all vary a little bit. Now, since we are using a aftermarket cooler, you want to take off the default bracket that comes with the motherboard itself. So you just need to unscrew these 4 screws here. Alright, and now when you lift up the motherboard, the bracket below it should drop off. There we go. So you just want to move this aside. So we need to install this underneath the motherboard. Based on the manual, you want these little like crab leg things to be facing away from the motherboard. So this gap should be away from the motherboard. So I'm going to show you now. So we just take the bracket and then kind of just place it on top here. So as you can see, these are away from the motherboard. They're not touching it. That's visible. So in our case, we're gonna need these screws right here and these pieces as well. So what you wanna do is take the screw and then take the plastic cover and put it on top and then just kinda like tighten it. All right, so this is what it should look like. So while holding this bracket, just kind of flip the motherboard. This is going to be a little bit difficult. And then just put one of the screws through it. So now that the screw is in place, we're just going to take one of these. And just attach it on top. So we're going to do that for the remaining 3. Alright, so I got the 3 installed, and this is just the last one. I just wanted to show it again. So put it in the slot here, and then just flip it over. And then just tighten this. You can hand tighten it now, and we'll use the screwdriver after. Alright, so as you can see, the bracket is fully installed. Now we just want to tighten it. So just go below it. And then the cooler has this little like tightening mechanism. You just take your screwdriver and then add it to the top and then just screw that bad boy in there. You don't want to go too crazy, but just tight enough. Alright, here you can see it's all done. And then all done on the other side. So this part can be a little bit tricky. We're going to be installing the CPU cooler. And honestly, this is like one of the hardest parts of building the computer. Anything after this should be a walk in the park. Alright, so inside the box with the cooler, you get this little paste called a thermal compound, and it just is used to transmit heat from the processor itself to the cooler. So what you want to do is open this up. Now you're going to want to put a very small amount. So what people like to compare it to is like a grain of rice. So we're just going to apply a tiny little bit. Alright, so there we go, that should be perfect. Just wanted to show up a close-up, but that's about how much you need. Now next, what you're going to want to do is take off the little plastic coating here. So just peel that sucker. Yeah. So the way you want to mount it is for the fan to be pointing outside of the case. So usually what I like to do is just point the fan towards the input and outputs. So the fan is blowing, there's a little diagram on the top here. Let me see if I can get that. So the air is blowing this way, so you want the air to be coming outside of the case. So we want to mount it like this. So now that we got the thermal compound in place, we're just gonna slowly place the CPU cooler onto the CPU itself. What you want to do afterwards is just take this bracket and then just slide it into here. It's gonna be a little bit tricky. So a small change of plans, you might actually want to put the bracket inside the cooler first. So just put the bracket inside the cooler and then drop it into place. I forgot to mention in this video, but you have to tighten the middle screw as well. That will help with the tension and also keep the bracket in place. And then screw them into place. So once you've tightened one corner just a little bit, you want to do it diagonally, because that way it'll distribute the thermal compound evenly. So I just tightened this one a little bit. So what you want to do is go onto the other side here and just do this corner. Alright, so it's my first time installing this cooler. I just found out you actually have to take off the fan first. So just pull off these tabs here. Okay, now we got access to the screws. So just do this one here. Alright, so now we've tightened these two somewhat, so we want to do the other side. Alright, so then you just want to keep screwing all four corners until everything distributes evenly. Alright, so we're basically done. It's screwed in pretty much all the way, but you do want to tighten it a little bit, just not to the point where you're going to break anything, of course. Alright, lastly we just want to install the fan back again. So it just clips into place. You can do one side first and then the other. Alright, so next up you want to install the storage drive. So this is an M.2 drive, so it actually fits into this slot right here. So I'm just going to open it up quickly. So this little thing, it's quite easy to install. You just match the little tab here with the tab on the storage drive itself and then just slot it into place. Like so. And we're going to grab the little screw that came with the motherboard. And then while we hold this down, we're just going to put the screw into place. And then you're all set. Alrighty, so at this stage we're going to be installing the memory. So I'm just going to open this up. These are some nice looking sticks. So basically, I always recommend dual channel just for reliability, and you're going to get a little bit better performance as well. And what dual channel is basically you get two sticks of the same kind instead of just one. So it might cost a little bit extra, but I think it's worth it in my opinion. So we have two sticks here. It's 8 gigabytes each for 16 gigs total. So I'm just going to grab the first one, and they're fairly easy to install. All you want to do is just open up these tabs, and you always want to install it on the second. This one actually stays in place. All you have to do is just match the tab here with the tab there, and then it kind of just slots into place. You can start from one corner. All right, and then you just push it down. So you push it on one corner and then push it on the other, and then it's good to go. So we installed the first one on the second slot. So for dual channel, it has to be 2 slots over to take advantage of it. So we're going to be doing on the second slot and the fourth slot. So just grab the other stick and then do the same thing. Just open up the tab, slide it in on one end, and then push it in on the other. And then you're all set. So if you were to get 2 more, for example, you would install it then on the first and the third. But for your first set, you want to do it on the second and the fourth. Alright, so here we have the motherboard. It's all set up. And if you ask me, it's looking pretty sweet. Now, I like to do everything outside of the case because once you actually put the motherboard in the case, it's a lot harder to work around it. But yeah, everything's pretty much all set, so we can start unboxing the case and seeing how it goes from there. So this is the red trim. As I figured, they're not going to include the black or white. but it still looks pretty good. And apparently there's two front LED fans here as well. We got a nice little windowed side panel. And then this is the included 500 watt power supply. It's the Elite V3 if I'm not wrong. You got the little mustard cables going on here. But yeah, let's see what we can do with this thing. So just a quick run around. We got the power supply here that's included. And then you also have the hard drive bay here. You can mount an SSD on the top here. And then this is where the IO shield goes. And you also get 4 expansion slots here. And then this is a bracket if you want to ever change the CPU cooler that we installed on the motherboard. You can do so without having to physically remove the motherboard and put it back. So this is a nice little feature. And then here we have all the plugs that we're going to be plugging into the motherboard. Alright, so the first thing you always want to install is the input-output shield. So we've laid the case flat. The side with the tabs poking in is the inside, and the clear side is the one that's going on the outside of the case. So usually the audio plugs go on the downside of the case, but you can double check your motherboard to be safe. So what you want to do is just take the shield and go put it here, and kind of just push it into place here. So I just like to put the bottom side first and then just kind of snap it into place. Alright, so as you can see, it's been installed. I'll do a little bit of a close-up. So this is what it should look like. Now, since the power supply is installed, we don't actually need to install it ourselves. But if you did buy a separate power supply, it's fairly easy. All you need to do is just screw it in with these 4 screws that are included with the power supply itself. And then just make sure that the fan is actually pointing towards the downside of the case, because we have this dust filter here. And it's going to suck in cold air through the bottom. And this dust filter is also going to protect it from dust and other particles and stuff. So yeah, just fan facing down and then just screw in the 4 screws on the back and you're good to go. But since we got this already installed, we're just going to be putting in the motherboard. So the first step is to kind of just move the cables away. Alright, perfect. So now we need to install something that's called standoffs. It's basically where the motherboard sits on the screws so you can screw it in place. So if you look closely, we have 2 already pre-installed here. So we have one standoff here and then another one here, and we have to install the rest on our own. So the case comes with standoffs, of course, so we just want to open this bag up. So these are the standoffs that I'm referring to. And then Cooler Master is nice enough to include this little adapter here so you can screw it with your screwdriver. So if you actually look at the case here, it gives you a little indication of which motherboard we're using. So we have M for micro ATX and I for mini ATX. So since we know our motherboard is a micro ATX, all we need to do is just install the standoffs where there's an M. Even though motherboard standards generally have the same mounting placements, I recommend checking with your motherboard because it still can vary a little bit before you install these standoffs. Alright, so now we've got all of our standoffs in place. Something to keep in mind is you do not want to over tighten these, because if you do, you're going to have problems afterwards where you're not going to be able to remove the screw, and that's just a big problem you don't want to run into. Alright, so now that everything's in place, we're going to grab our motherboard. So you're going to want to lean in with the motherboard and then kind of just try to get it into the slots at the end. Make sure there's no cables in the way. Alright, so our motherboard's in place now. So you just want to go ahead and screw all the screws that we put the standoffs for. So I also like to check just to make sure that everything got installed properly and nothing's out of place, and everything looks good. I'm also going to be installing an extra fan. These are pretty easy to add to the case, so we want to make sure the airflow is correct. So usually where the grill is and where the wire is running through, that's where the air is going to be exhausted. So we want this to be pushing air out. So we just take it like this and put it on the back of the case, and then we use the included screws and screw it into place. Next up, we have the front panel ports. So this is a little bit of an annoying part because they're very small and kind of hard to plug in, but it'll show you what it's for. And then if you just match it to the motherboard, so whenever you see a plus, that's where the arrow would go in. So for example, the first one is power LED. The first little pin is plus, so I'm gonna plug in the plus pin right here. And then the next one is minus, so I'm going to grab the power LED minus and then just plug it over here. It's much easier to check the manual rather than actually looking on the board, but I'll just do this for now. So below it we have hard drive LED, and the first pin is a plus. So I'm going to take this one. Alright, so this one's hard drive LED, and as you can see, plus is on the top side, so I'm just going to get the arrow right here and plug it into the plus side. Alright, so the next one's power button. So the plus side is on the left, so just match this up. And then below it is the reset. The plus side is on the left again. So just match the arrow to the plus sign. And you're all set. I'm gonna change these first two just so it looks nicer. Alright, so there we have it, all good to go. So the next one is the motherboard USB plug. Pretty self-explanatory, just plug it into one of the ports. This one has two. The next one is the audio plug. They all have a slightly different layout, so you'll be able to tell which one goes where. So this is the CPU power connector. Some motherboards use a 4-pin and some more higher end motherboards use an 8-pin. Luckily this is breakable, so you can break it into two pieces. And you can use the 4-pin if you have a motherboard that only needs that, or you can put it back together and use it for a 8-pin. This is the 4 or 8-pin motherboard connector. It's always on the top of the motherboard. I just plugged mine in. I usually like to do it right after I put the motherboard into the case, and that way you don't forget it, and it's just a little bit easier to manage. I've also plugged in the fan connector for the Deepcool splitter. Up there we also have the fan connection for the CPU cooler. I recommend plugging this in before you put the motherboard into the case, but I did do it afterwards because I forgot, but now it's all plugged in there. So this is what we got so far. It's not looking bad at all. I don't really like the power supply cables. They're the ugliest I've seen in a long time, but what can you do? It was included with the case. I did run a lot of cables underneath the motherboard because this case doesn't have any cutouts for the cables. If you're new to building computers, I don't recommend doing that. You can just go ahead and plug it in. But I find the cheaper the case, the harder it is to build it in. I ended up not installing the RGB lights. I'm going to save that for another time. So we're just going to plug in a couple more cables, and then that should be pretty much it. I'm going to show you how to tidy up a little bit. And then I also have a solid state drive that I'm going to be adding. This is just a cheapo Amazon SSD. It's called Torosus or something. Sounds like a disease. But anyways, this is a 128 gigabyte SSD. Definitely not going to be in this computer forever. We're going to be upgrading it later down the road. But yeah, I'm going to show you how to install this as well, and then let's go finish up this bad boy. Alright, so for the SSD, we only need 2 screws and they're included with the case itself. So I'm just going to grab the SSD and then just place it into place here, and then just put in the 2 screws. Now we're going to grab one of these SATA cables from the motherboard box. I'm going to be using the right angled one, and then just plug it in. Alright, next up we're going to be plugging in the power cable for SATA. So I'm just going to run it through here. And then just plug it into the motherboard. Alright, so now we're going to plug in the 24-pin cable. This is the beefy one to power the entire motherboard. So I'm just going to run it through here and then plug it in. There we go. And then also quickly just plug in the USB 3.0 cable. It's located right below it. Perfect. So this is the fan splitter that I picked up. I've plugged in the 3 fans, and then this one is going to the motherboard like you saw earlier. So it actually has an adhesive. I'm just going to peel it off and then stick it to the case. Now the one reason you might want to be careful about this is because it might stick out too much to the point where the side panel wouldn't close. The case I'm using has a bulge on the side, so hopefully it should be okay, but I am going to test it and make sure that it should close fine. So pretty far along at this point, I'm just going to do some small cable management, and then we can finally install the graphics card. Alright, so now for the final part, which is also my favorite part, we're going to be installing the graphics card. Now it's a fairly easy process. I want to show you how to do it. So first of all, just take your screwdriver and then take off these two brackets located here. So since it's going into this slot, you just got to match the brackets that you need to take off for it to go into place. Alright, so now we're going to take the card and we're just going to slide it into place. And then once it's in, you just push it in. And then you're pretty much good. Now you can just go ahead and screw it back. I like to look at the back just to make sure the ports are aligned. So this is what it looks like with the graphics card installed. And then we just need to plug in that last 8-pin plug right there. So I'm just going to go grab the cable and plug it in. So it's the next day, the computer's all done. I hooked everything up and I'm gonna be mashing the delete button. Hopefully I can get into the BIOS. Alright, so the $900 gaming PC build is done and it's looking pretty clean. I was worried initially about the white memory sticks, but with the RGB lighting up on the top, it's not really that noticeable and I still think it looks pretty sleek. I also like the windowed side panel. Even though it is a cheap plastic, you can still see through it and see all the components, which is really nice. So yeah, I'm super happy with it. Let me know what you guys think. Would you change anything about it? Also stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to be overclocking this machine as well as checking out temps, and I'm going to be running some benchmarks as well, so that should be fun. But anyways guys, leave a like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.